For so many years, when I started to get sick, or when I flared up, or when I started to feel substantial fatigue, I would turn to my partner and say that I wasn't feeling well. And he would then tell me the same thing each time: just rest. The problem was that the only kind of rest I knew about was sleeping or taking a nap, and I hate taking naps. It's really hard for me. I just can't do it. So I would lie there frustrated, feeling like I was resting the wrong way and ruminating over that. And instead of feeling restored, I just felt tired afterward. So it didn't help. I didn't realize that I had started to believe a really common misconception that rest only counts if you're asleep or literally doing nothing. That belief has kept me stuck for years. In grad school and while working a 9 to 5, I kept pushing myself, thinking rest wasn't accessible to me because I couldn't nap or sit still or keep my mind from racing. And I still felt at the time that rest was a luxury I couldn't afford. I also know that I'm not alone in this. So many of my clients, both coaching and consulting clients actually, who are predominantly first gen, Latine, Indigenous, Black, disabled, neurodivergent, their caregivers, their students, their professionals, they grew up learning that rest is done one way. And if that doesn't work for us, then we assume that we're the problem. We internalize it, we personalize it. But in actuality, many of us weren't taught that there are different types of rest. And believe it or not, some of the most important types of rest don't involve sleep at all. There are actually 7 types of rest identified by Dr. Sandra Dalton-Smith in her book, Sacred Rest: Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity. Today, I'm going to walk you through 4 of the most overlooked ones in my coaching practice among first-gen college students, graduate students, and working professionals. And if you want to explore the full framework and all 7 types of rest, I strongly encourage you to get yourself a copy of that book. I also created a digital resource inspired by this framework, which I've shared with my group coaching program participants for the Grad Empowerment Coaching Circle. And this is also the kind of work I do with my one-on-one clients. So if you want to learn more about my services, you're welcome to check out the link in the show notes. But for now, let's get into the most overlooked forms of rest. Here we go. Welcome to the award-winning Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on inclusive grad school stories and learn about personal development and productivity tips. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Vu, a certified coach, consultant, and author, and I will be serving as your Femtor, providing you with insider knowledge to help you reach your personal and professional goals. Let's start with what you're going to be hearing about today. Today, I'm going to highlight 4 types of rest that are commonly overlooked. I'm going to share what each rest type includes and why it's often overlooked. I'm also going to share a few examples of practical ways you can start to practice them. And then at the end, I'll share a few prompts so that hopefully you can identify the type of rest you actually need right now. So why is resting so hard for so many of us? First, let's get this straight that resting is not a neutral topic. Rest sits at the intersection of culture, identity, labor, capitalism, and survival. For first-gen students and professionals, again, especially those of us from BIPOC, immigrant, low-income, disabled, or neurodivergent communities, rest has often been framed as a luxury, like I mentioned earlier, something we can't afford. It's also been framed as something that you access after doing a long list of obligations. And so I also want to mention that a lot of us carry heavier emotional, cognitive, and caregiving loads. And so it's understandable to struggle to rest. If rest feels unfamiliar, unsafe, or unproductive, there's nothing wrong with you. We just haven't had access to different types of rest. We haven't had the privilege to rest. We haven't been taught about different types of rest either. So this is why naming different forms of rest matters. It gives you a few accessible options. It expands on what rest can look like for you. It helps you move away from all or nothing thinking, of thinking I'm either always doing a million things or I'm just sleeping or napping. And it also will help you develop practices that can actually meet your needs right now. The first type of rest I'm going to mention is called mental rest. Mental rest is one of the most overlooked types of rest because for a lot of us, we grew up believing that having this mental overload, having a million and one things to worry about, was simply part of being responsible. I'm thinking especially of first-gen folks, eldest daughters, those of us with a lot of responsibilities. We're just so used to always having to do so much, constantly having to think ahead, to solve problems, to interpret, to look over materials, to hold everything in our heads, because that's what you needed to do to survive. But if your brain is always on, it's always tracking tasks, it's always worrying about the next thing, it's always trying to plan for yourself and everyone around you, that level of mental strain is not good for you because it's quietly getting to you. It's quietly burning you out. And right now, I'm actually thinking about a client that I support through my one-on-one consulting services. And and right now, I'm thinking about a client that I support in my one-on-one coaching practice. This person is juggling grad school, full-time work, parenting responsibilities, and serious health conditions. So when we work together, many of our sessions are centered around building study plans. We're breaking down tasks, we're mapping out the semester, and we're doing this not because this person isn't capable. They're a full-grown adult, more than capable of doing all of this on their own, but they have so much on their plate that their mind is already carrying so much. So that means that having that structured support is a form of mental rest because it gives their brain a break from constant decision making and planning. And that relief is restorative because they know they can just turn to the plan and follow the plan that was mapped out. That includes planning for flare ups, that includes planning for needing to rest, that includes planning for some things taking longer than expected. And they know that either way, they're going to be able to reach their goals. So in your case, what would mental rest look like for you? Here are a few things that you could potentially try out. One is doing a quick brain dump before bed. I highly recommend this. I do this on my phone in the Notes app. I know that I could probably benefit from not doing it on my phone and instead having a notepad, but in any case, do a brain dump. Keep a parking lot document where you list out things that you want to do in the future, or you could list out incomplete tasks, but it's just a place to put your thoughts there. You could also start to pause or delegate some mentally draining commitments. You don't have to do all the things. And you could add brief pauses between responsibilities to reset your mind. I do this a lot. This is why my coaching sessions are not an hour long, they are 50 minutes long, because I need that in between period, even if it's just 5 to 10 minutes to decompress and get mentally ready for the next session. So now the second type of rest that is often overlooked is emotional rest. This is a form of rest that goes unnoticed, especially for those of us that were raised with messages like, stay strong, don't be a burden to others, Don't be too sensitive. Don't be too dramatic. These beliefs come from cultural, generational, and systemic pressures, and they make it difficult to acknowledge how we're feeling and all that we're holding. And this type of rest reminds me of a client that I was helping with this week. This is an undergrad, and their scholarship program hired me to help her and her cohort to work on grad school applications. So they were working on the application. Specifically, this was a personal statement for counseling psych programs. And in that statement, they named how growing up, expressing emotions was framed as a weakness. This was something that they were told they had to suppress, they had to hide, they had to control it. And that kind of messaging stays with us. In fact, I resonated a lot with this messaging too. And it teaches us to bottle things up, to mask our true feelings, and to worry about everyone else's emotions before our own. And I want to tell you that emotional labor is still labor. And it's especially heavy for women, for femmes, for non binary folks, because it's gendered labor. And this labor drains you more than you even realize, more than you give yourself credit for. And so emotional rest is needed because it creates space to feel what you feel without judgment, without performing, and without the pressure to always make it seem like you're okay. And I want to share a few ways that you can practice emotional rest. One way you can practice emotional rest is by using a feelings wheel and starting to explicitly name specific emotions you're feeling. Sometimes we get so caught up on very generic and common emotions like happiness, anger, frustration, sadness, but there's so many more feelings. And if you want to add to that, if you want to add another level to it, you can get yourself not just a feelings wheel, but also a sensations wheel, because that's a whole other level of awareness of how you're feeling in your body. Another way you can practice emotional rest is by reassessing emotionally draining relationships. And this is a hard one because it might mean having to distance yourself from someone who drains you. And I have been in those types of friendships where it feels like it's very one-sided. And I know that it's challenging to set limits on those relationships or to let go of those relationships, but at least reassess them. And you can also start to do some reflecting after emotionally hard days to try to pinpoint what was it that made it so emotionally hard and what can you do for yourself to honor your current feelings. And then the last thing you can do is to find trusted people that you can confide in. So share how you're doing, how you're feeling honestly with someone that you trust. Sometimes for some of us, it's our therapist. Sometimes it could be a really close friend. Sometimes it could be a parent. Sometimes it could be a spouse, you name it, but find ways so that you can practice emotional rest. The third type of rest that I'm going to name right now is called social rest. And this is tied to, it's similar to emotional rest, but this is tied to remembering that not every relationship you have is restorative for you. And some of us, this is hard to accept because we've been raised to care for others, to people please, to always be available, to be supportive, to be helpful, to represent your community with pride. And sometimes, slowly but surely, you start to feel more social exhaustion. That can creep up. And it's even more exhausting if you have that added responsibility of always having to worry about others. And so it makes it hard to recognize when your own battery is being depleted. Social rest is also often normalized because we normalize relationships and environments that drain us. Again, it's not always okay to be available 24/7. You don't have to always be on. You don't have to be the best student or the best colleague You can be good enough and still tend to your needs. You can be a good enough family member and still support your family without draining yourself all the time. And so with this one, this example, I'm actually thinking about a client who had a one-on-one session, and in that session, they were preparing for an academic conference. And initially, their plan was centered around all things related to academics and making the most of the conference. So this was finishing their presentation, attending as many sessions as possible, staying professionally on, networking with other people. And after our session, we decided that she would build in this time to reconnect with friends at the beach. And even though the conference was still demanding, that little pocket of social rest, that little pocket of grounding time, that pocket of time where they felt affirmed in their connection with others made a big difference in how they felt and what they got out of the conference. So again, social rest is not about you withdrawing from people. It's not about you not caring about your relationships. It's about being intentional with the relationships that you do choose, the environments that you do put yourself in that actually refill you. And again, similar to emotional rest, reassessing those that are not restorative for you. What are some ways to practice social rest? Again, seek out those relationships where you can be yourself and you don't have to be masking or performing. Spend time with those who really get you. Spend time with people who fill your cup. Join identity affirming communities, cultural communities, support groups, anything that helps you to feel good socially. And again, I can't say this enough, make sure to limit your draining interactions. And I say limit because sometimes you can't completely cut off someone. Sometimes this person is a supervisor and you're stuck in a situation where you can't yet switch to a different job. Sometimes this person is a family member and it's really hard to cut them off because they're always showing up at big events that you also want to be there for. But you can still limit those interactions, right? Now let's talk about the fourth and last form of rest that a lot of us overlook. And this one might be one of my favorites. This is creative rest. Creative rest. This is one of the most overlooked types of rest because a lot of us were taught to only value creativity when it results in productivity, when it's a publication, a project, a finished product, or even something that you can sell. And a lot of us also think that creative rest is also something that's just for creatives, only for artists, only for those that do this, again, for a living. But that's not necessarily true. Creativity doesn't have to be about making art and capitalizing off of it. It can also be about imagining possibilities, solving problems, seeing connections, and accessing the part of yourself that feels curious and alive again. And here I want to share a little bit more on the personal side. I'm thinking of myself here because I recently celebrated my 17-year wedding anniversary, and we celebrated by watching The Lion King on Broadway. And if you know me, you know that I was a theater kid and that I love, love, love watching shows. And I've seen this show probably 4 or 5 times now. I've seen it in LA, in New York, and now in Las Vegas. And every single time I watch this show, I cry more than once. Oof, I'm reminded of how magical theater is, of how it just does something to me. It lifts my spirit in a way that nothing else has ever done. And that experience, again, it wasn't about being productive. It wasn't about like something that I wanted to show off. This is actually the first time I mentioned it to anyone outside of my close family and friend group. But it was so restorative. It really fed my creative soul. And it reminded me that creative rest reconnects us with joy, with awe, with our childhood, with our sense of wonder. And it's hard because sometimes you've been in survival mode for such a long time that you get completely disconnected from creativity. And I'm getting emotional here because I was a creative child. Not only did I do theater, I wrote poetry. I was constantly, finding ways to just explore my imagination as a young child. And I continued to explore that throughout K through 12 and even in parts of my college experience. But I noticed that grad school did something to me where I lost that sense of creativity. I lost touch with it. It's not like it was gone. We always are creative, but I had become so disconnected with it that it felt out of reach. And so I want to remind you that if you're someone that feels this way, then I highly recommend that you schedule in some creative rest. And in fact, right now, you're probably taking some time off because of the Thanksgiving holiday. And so if you're still in this mode of taking time off and actually resting, I hope that you can consider creative rest for yourself. What does this look like? This can look like visiting any place that sparks inspiration. This can look like reading or watching something outside of your work that you really enjoy. In fact, I'll mention another one. I also recently watched the Juan Gabriel docuseries, and I absolutely loved it. Ooh, I loved it so much. It was so much fun. I feel like I know him that much more. I had no idea about his backstory. I love listening to the music again. Brought me back to my childhood. So it could be something as simple as that, watching something just for the sake of enjoying it. It could also mean engaging in hobbies without expectations. So I'm definitely in my mid-30s because I have been so crafty lately and I'm really owning it and embracing it. So whatever hobby feels good to you, embracing that, or even surrounding yourself with anything that feels beautiful or creative. So that's it. That's the 4 types of rest. Again, they were mental rest, emotional rest, social rest, and creative rest. And again, there are more types of rest than this. In the book that I mentioned called Sacred Rest by Dr. Sandra Dalton-Smith mentions 7 types of rest. So if you want to learn more about these types of rest, definitely check out the book. And if you want more tools, more resources, or even coaching on similar topics, I encourage you to check out my Grad Empowerment Coaching Circle. I plan to open up another cohort of it in the new year in January, or even potentially at the latest sometime in February. So get on my wait list so that you can be part of that next cycle, and check out the link in my show notes to learn more about it. Before I go, let me leave you with a few questions so that you can identify the type of rest that you might be needing right now. The first question is, what kind of exhaustion am I experiencing this week? Is it mental, emotional, social, creative, or something else? Which of these forms of rest feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable, and why? Which form of rest feels the most accessible to you right now? And what's one tiny rest practice that you can commit to for the next 7 days? You could even say for the weekend if you want, but at least within the next couple of days to the next week. All right, thanks again for being here and for choosing rest simply by pausing and listening to this episode. If you found it helpful, share it with a friend or a loved one. And as always, I'll talk to you all next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The second way is to get your copy of my free resource kit linked in my show notes. This kit includes tools, worksheets, and podcast playlists on all things grad school, productivity, and personal development. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @Grad School Femtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.